At dinner, everyone laughed when my mom caught me a mistake, but her old friend didn't laugh at all. He just stared at me, then asked my dad why he said I was gone.
Every Sunday, my family ate dinner at exactly 6:30, with the TV humming quietly in the next room and my mother correcting the way everyone held their forks. My older sister Claire sat beside her like always. My little brother Ethan talked about baseball practice, and I stayed at the far end of the table where nobody really noticed if I spoke or not. That was normal in our house. Halfway through dinner, my mother pointed at me while talking to one of my dad's old friends and laughed. "This is Lena," she said. "The mistake." Everyone smiled like they'd heard it 100 times before. But the man across the table didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a second too long, then glanced at my father, who immediately looked down at his plate. And when dinner ended, I walked past the kitchen and heard the stranger say quietly, "Wait, you told me she was gone." I stopped in the hallway so fast my shoulder brushed the wall. For a second, nobody answered him. The sink water kept running, plates clinked softly together, and the TV audience laughed at some joke in the other room. Then my mother spoke in the same calm voice she used whenever she wanted something to sound normal. "You're mistaken, Daniel." Mistaken. Not confused. Not, "What are you talking about?" Just, mistaken. I stayed there another second, barely breathing, before my father said quietly, "Let's not do this here." That was enough to make me move again. In our house, people only lowered their voices when something mattered. I went upstairs to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the hallway light under my door. I could still hear muffled voices downstairs, though I couldn't make out words anymore. The strange part was, none of this actually felt new. Not completely. Growing up, I'd always had the feeling there was some conversation everyone else had already heard except me. Small things never lined up properly. My baby pictures were missing from the living room wall. Claire had 3 photo albums in the cabinet downstairs. Ethan had 2. I had a single envelope with loose school photos and a hospital bracelet with no hospital name on it. Whenever relatives visited, they'd look surprised by how old I was, like they kept forgetting I existed at all. And my mother never called me by my name unless other people were around. Usually I was her, or this one, or the mistake. I used to think it was just a cruel family joke people got too comfortable repeating. But downstairs, the stranger's voice rose again for just a moment before going quiet. And through the floorboards, I heard him say one sentence that made my stomach tighten. "She has no idea, does she?" The next morning, nobody mentioned what happened in the kitchen. My mother hummed while making coffee like always. Claire scrolled through her phone, and Ethan argued about being late for practice. Only my dad looked different. He barely touched his breakfast. Daniel stayed in town another day. My mother said he was an old business friend, but every time he tried talking to me, she found a reason to interrupt. "So, Lena," he asked carefully that afternoon, "you've lived here your whole life?" Before I could answer, my mother stepped between us with a tight smile. "She doesn't remember anything before kindergarten anyway." It was such a strange thing to say that even Daniel paused. Later that night, I started noticing details I'd ignored for years. My blood type didn't match either of my parents. My last name looked handwritten on old school forms. And when I asked my father why everyone treated me differently, he went pale before quietly saying, "Your mother had her reasons." That answer stayed in my head for 2 straight days. So, Sunday morning, while everyone was at church, I unlocked the filing cabinet in my parents' room using a spare key from my father's desk. I already knew where my birth certificate was. My mother kept it hidden beneath old insurance papers like it wasn't supposed to be seen. At first, everything looked normal. My name, my birthday. Then I noticed the correction stamp. The document had been amended 6 years after I was born. And underneath the dark ink covering my mother's name, another name was still barely visible. Not my mother's.
A birth certificate getting corrected years later is strange enough. But why hide the mother's name unless someone expected it to be questioned?
My stomach dropped. That was when my mother walked into the room. For the first time in my life, she didn't look angry at me. She looked scared. "Give me that," she said immediately. A second later, Daniel appeared in the doorway behind her. His eyes locked onto the paper in my hands. He stepped closer slowly, read the hospital name, then froze completely. "This date," he whispered. Then he looked directly at me. "Did they never tell you who your real mother is?" The room went completely silent after he said that. My mother grabbed the birth certificate from my hands so fast the paper nearly tore. "You need to leave," she snapped at Daniel, her voice shaking now. But he didn't move. Instead, he looked at my father. "You told me the baby died." My father sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, like his legs stopped working. He covered his face for a second before saying quietly, "I thought it was over." Nobody was speaking clearly anymore, but somehow it all felt connected. The missing photos, the jokes, the way my mother looked at me sometimes, like I personally ruined her life. Daniel finally turned back to me. "Your mother's name is Elena Vale," he said carefully. "She's been looking for you for years." My mother laughed once under her breath, bitter and sharp. After everything she did? But Daniel ignored her. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. The second I saw the woman on the screen, my chest tightened. I recognized her immediately. She was the woman I'd seen parked across our street 3 different times that month. 2 days later, I met Elena at a small diner outside town. I expected someone dramatic, someone confident enough to tear apart an entire family just by showing up. Instead, she looked nervous before I even sat down. Her hands shook around a coffee cup she barely touched. The first thing she said was, "I never gave you away." Then everything finally came out. Years ago, Elena had an affair with my father while they worked together. When she gave birth to me, there were complications during delivery. While she recovered, my mother discovered the affair. Through family legal connections and falsified paperwork, she took custody of me before Elena even left the hospital. Elena was told her baby died. My father knew the truth, but stayed silent to protect his marriage. And my mother raised me inside the house as a reminder of what happened. That was why I was the mistake. Not because of something I did, because I existed. When Claire and Ethan learned the truth, everything inside the family collapsed fast. Claire stopped speaking to our mother entirely. Ethan moved in with relatives for a while. My father left the house within the month. As for my mother, she kept insisting she had saved me. But for the first time, nobody agreed with her anymore. A week later, Elena showed me an old photo album she'd kept hidden for 19 years. Every page was filled with pictures of me as a baby, proof that someone had wanted me all along.
It's strange how families can repeat the same story for years without anyone questioning it, especially when the person living inside the story never gets to hear where it all really started.